Alright, this is the final video, I promise. We looked at all the different market structures. Now we kind of got to look at the flip side of all of this, which is the factors of production. And mostly what we're talking about when we looked at factors of production is going to be the labor market, although essentially it's the same idea if we were talking about capital, which would be machinery, and in fact there's a little bit of a relationship between those, which we won't really get into right now in this video, but you might want to look into that briefly. But just like we saw in the market, or sorry, in the product markets and the individual cost curves for the firm, we also have different market structures when it comes to the supply and demand of labor. And in perfect competition, much like we saw in the market structure when we were looking at the cost for a firm, if there's perfect competition for the market for labor, well, we're going to ultimately be wage takers. And so let's start by drawing like what a market demand for labor, demand and supply for labor will look like. I know this is a shock to you. It looks like that. So that's I'm going to call that labor demanded and labor supplied at higher. And now our price this time is wages. So at higher wages, more people are willing to work. At lower wages, fewer people are willing to work. And of course, if you're a business, if you can hire people really cheap, you'll hire a lot of them. If they're really expensive, you won't hire nearly as many of them. So yeah, if wages were incredibly low, I might not bother getting a bulldozer. I might just hire a whole bunch of people and give them shovels. But that'd have to be really, really inexpensive labor. So, all right, and then of course this is the quantity of labor. And that could be, you could think of that as number of workers, or you could think of it really as labor hours that they'd be willing to work. And in a market, we have a equilibrium wage, and we have an equilibrium quantity. And just like we saw in perfect competition for goods, if there's perfect competition for the labor, then individual firms are going to be wage takers. I'm going to label that, actually, I'll label that wage M for market wage. And of course this graph, it's wage and it is quantity. Quantity of labor that this individual firm, now we're looking at the individual firm's graph, how much will this individual firm want to hire? Now this ends up being really fairly similar, but this line here, this wage taker, is really not demand now, it's the supply of labor. Another word for the supply of labor is marginal resource cost, and I'm going to call it marginal resource cost of labor. It's a marginal cost curve, just like we saw before. A marginal supply curve really is marginal cost, but in this case, because there are so many workers and I'm just in this perfect competition, I can hire as many people as I want at the current given wage. If I tried, I'm not going to pay them more than I have to, so I mean I guess I could pay more than I have to, but if I try to hire people for less than that, they'll just go work for somebody else. So I'm going to hire people at the market wage, and the marginal cost, the cost of each additional worker, is going to be the same throughout. So the marginal resource cost, marginal cost of labor here, is constant. The demand, though, for labor is something that's actually going to be a little bit different. And if we were really looking at a firm, it'd probably look something like this, because just like the reverse of our marginal cost curve, initially as I hire a couple more, I might gain some productivity because we can specialize our jobs a little bit more. So if I was a pizza firm, I could have one person be driver, one person make the pizzas, one person answer the phones, and so we get a little more efficient. And so actually I might initially get some efficiencies, but at some point, as I keep hiring more people, they're becoming less and less productive, and they're starting to get in their way. And so actually normally I'll just model my demand for labor, my individual firm's demand for labor, as just that downward sloping portion. And really what we're talking about here with this labor market is the marginal revenue product. Demand in this case is the I'm going to keep hiring workers, I'm going to keep demanding more workers as long as the additional revenue, the marginal revenue that they bring in for the products that they produce, the additional revenue I get is greater than the marginal resource cost. So again, I'm going to probably, in this case, hire exactly this number of people. Here's my equilibrium quantity. I'm not going to hire down here. Excuse me. I'm not going to hire down here because the amount that this additional worker could get me compared to the how much it would cost me. So the revenue that I would get compared to my cost at this point over here would be losing me money. This would be, sorry Aaron, I'm going to immortalize you here, but Aaron's the guy we always pick on in class. This is the Aaron point right here, because the amount of additional revenue Aaron could get me is less than I would have to pay him. I'm not going to hire him. Now, if something changes in the labor market, if all of a sudden there's a much larger supply of labor and it drives down wages, then maybe it'll become worth hiring Aaron. Or maybe if on the flip side, remember this is marginal revenue, maybe if I can sell my good for a lot more than I used to be able to, even though Aaron isn't going to produce a whole lot of products, the revenue that I get times the number of products he produces might be enough, so I might actually hire him. So if I gain some efficiencies, I might see that firm might have an increase in the marginal revenue per worker, and so then maybe I would actually hire Aaron. But that's the basics for the graph of the perfect competition. That's probably what you're most likely to see. But there is the possibility that you hear of a monopsony. Well, for monopsony, I should write these labels in: wage and quantity of labor. For monopsony, I am the only employer of a certain type of worker, and so my demand for that, again, so this could, there aren't that many good examples of this, but maybe if I'm the only school district in a small town, then I'm the only employer of I'm the only employer of teachers in that small town, so I'm the only one who would pay for them. But I'm going to still have my same demand curve. I've got a and again, that's the marginal revenue product, how much additional I make from each worker. But this time, the marginal resource cost is actually going to be, the supply that I'm facing is now the whole market supply for workers. And now this provides a slightly different scenario than what I saw before. If this is the supply of workers, I can hire one, maybe I can hire one at this wage, I could hire two at this wage, I could hire three at this wage. And so there's maybe that market equilibrium. But my marginal resource cost, so my resource is this worker, the cost of each additional worker is actually going up a little bit, because maybe this one, I'll call this $4, right? at $4, I could hire one worker. There'd be one person who was willing to work at $4 an hour. If I wanted to hire 2 workers, I might have to pay $5 an hour. Well, if I have to pay $5 an hour, my total that I'm going to have to pay, because this first worker is going to be like, hey, wait, I need a raise too. I'm doing the same job. So now my total cost, let's think about that for a second. If I, so my wage, my quantity of workers, my total cost, if I pay $4 an hour, I'm going to be able to get one worker. Oops, I should write 4. So my total cost is $4. If I hire a second worker, I'm going to have to pay him $5, and that means the first worker I hired is probably going to demand a pay raise, and now I'm going to have to pay $10, and so my marginal cost there was $6. So even though the wage only went up to 5, my cost went up to 6. And so just like we saw in monopolistic competition, it's kind of the reverse of it. Now I'm going to get a marginal resource cost that's actually going to be sloping upward. I'm going to erase my numbers there because that was just for example purposes. And what we're going to see there is then as I'm adding additional workers, my actual cost is going up even faster. And again, you can do the same math and you'll see that the slope is twice as steep there. And so what I'm actually going to hire is at this point here, this is the number of workers I'm going to hire. But to hire that many workers, I'm actually only going to pay them this wage here. I don't know. I'll just call it W for wage. The wage that I'm actually going to pay them is going to be here. But the reason I stopped there is because the cost of an additional worker from this point forward is going to be higher than the revenue I can get from that worker. And so again, we end up with a little bit of that deadweight loss. We are not at that socially efficient point there. So a monopsony causes a similar problem. We have fewer workers hired, and they're actually paid a lower than what would be the equilibrium, the social equilibrium wage. And so that's monopsony. I don't think you're going to need necessarily a lot of monopsony, but it's at least worth me mentioning. I'm going to erase these things off of there. If you would like any more detail on any of these things, of course, come to class, ask them to me, or post in the comments. So thanks for joining me. I hope this will be of some use to you.